The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to take back. Mark Stevens stood frozen by the office doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs as his boss, completely unaware of his presence, continued to slur revelations that would change everything. If you've ever had a moment where your entire life shifted on its axis, where truth crashed through carefully constructed lies, stay with me. This story might just help you find the courage you need when facing your own impossible situation. Before we dive deeper into Mark's story, if you're finding value in these real-life narratives that reveal the complicated nature of workplace relationships and family struggles, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful human stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles. Mark Stevens hadn't planned on returning to the office that night. At 38, his life had finally found a delicate balance after years of turmoil. As senior vice president at Westfield International, he commanded respect in the corporate world, but his true pride was his daughter Emma, now 15 and blossoming into a remarkable young woman. Since losing his wife Diane to cancer 5 years ago, Mark had rebuilt their lives piece by piece, though the void she left seemed impossible to fill. Until recently, that Friday had been particularly significant. Mark had finally asked Dr. Sophia Reyes, Emma's former grief counselor turned family friend, to dinner, just the two of them, without Emma as their usual buffer. After months of meaningful glances and conversations that lingered longer than necessary, Mark had taken the leap. Sophia had smiled, tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, and said yes with such warmth that Mark felt something long dormant stir within him. Been floating on that feeling all day, wrapping up client meetings with unusual efficiency, eager to get home and prepare for the weekend. Emma was staying with her grandparents, giving Mark rare personal time that now held promise beyond the usual solitude. He'd made it halfway to his car when he realized he'd left his presentation materials in the conference room, materials he needed to review before Monday's board meeting. With a quick glance at his watch, he decided to double back. He still had plenty of time before he was due to pick up Sophia. The office was eerily quiet as Mark made his way through the dimly lit hallways. Most employees had cleared out for the weekend, eager to escape into their personal lives. He retrieved his portfolio from the conference room and was heading toward the exit when he heard voices coming from Richard Westfield's office, the company founder and CEO, and Mark's direct superior for the past decade. The door was partially open, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Mark would have continued walking if not for the mention of his name, Mark Stevens. Richard's voice was unmistakable, though slurred in a way Mark had never heard before. "The poor bastard has no idea." Mark froze mid-step. He knew he should leave. That eavesdropping on his boss was unprofessional at best, career suicide at worst. But something in Richard's tone rooted him to the spot. "You can't keep carrying this guilt, Rich," came another voice. Garrett Phillips, the company's CFO and Richard's closest friend. "It's been 5 years. 5 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Richard corrected, followed by the sound of liquid being poured into a glass. "Since I killed his wife." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. His portfolio nearly slipped from suddenly numb fingers as he pressed himself against the wall, breath caught in his th. "You didn't kill Diane," Garrett's voice was firm but gentle. "The cancer did. Cancer she wouldn't have had if not for me," Richard's voice broke. "If not for what I did to that property. To all those properties." Mark's mind raced, struggling to make sense of what he was hearing. Diane had died from an aggressive form of leukemia that had taken her within 8 months of diagnosis. The doctors had called it environmental, but could never pinpoint a specific cause. "You couldn't have known the chemicals would leach into the groundwater," Garrett reasoned. "Bullshit." Richard's fist slammed down on something solid. "I had the reports. I had the environmental impact studies. I knew exactly what would happen if we cut corners on those disposal protocols. But I did it anyway because it saved us millions." "Millions, Garrett. And what did it cost?" "It cost Mark his wife. It cost Emma her mother. It cost 23 other families in that neighborhood their health, their lives." Mark's legs threatened to give out beneath him. The Stevens family had lived in Westfield Heights for 5 years before Diane got sick, a luxury development that Richard's company had built before expanding into international markets. They'd bought the house the year after Emma was born, drawn by the prestigious address and proximity to the city's best schools. It had been their dream home. You've made amends, Garrett said. The settlement fund, the medical trust, that Mark doesn't even know exists, Richard interrupted. He thinks his rapid promotions were based on merit. He has no idea I've been ensuring his success out of guilt. He has no idea I've been paying for Emma's private school tuition through a Shell scholarship program. Mark's mind reeled with this new information. Emma's prestigious academy had offered her a merit scholarship 3 years ago, something Mark had attributed to his daughter's intelligence and the school's generosity toward families who had suffered loss. You've been good to him, Garrett said. Making him the youngest VP in company history, ensuring he can provide Emma with everything she needs. Out of guilt. Richard's voice cracked. Not kindness. Guilt. And it's eating me alive, Garrett. Every time I see him succeeding, knowing it's partly because I've cleared obstacles from his path. Every time he thanks me for being understanding when he needs to leave early for Emma's events. He's grateful to me, the man responsible for his wife's death. Mark felt physically ill. The hallway seemed to tilt around him as memories flooded back, Richard's unexpected appearance at Diane's funeral, his insistence that Mark take all the time he needed before returning to work, the surprise promotion that had arrived just as the medical bills were threatening to overwhelm him. You need to tell him, Garrett said quietly. And destroy what little peace he's found? Richard laughed bitterly. Destroy his career? Because he would leave, Garrett. No amount of guilt money would make him stay once he knew the truth. And then what happens to Emma? What happens when he sues me, sues the company, and everything falls apart? You don't know that. I know exactly what would happen because it's what I would do in his position, Richard cut him off. If someone told me they were responsible for my wife's death, I'd burn their whole world down. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of another drink being poured. I can't keep living like this, Richard finally said, his voice smaller now. Seeing him every day, watching Emma grow up without her mother. And now I hear he's finally starting to date again, some doctor who helped Emma through her grief. He's finally finding happiness, and all I can think is that I'm the reason he lost it in the first place. Mark didn't realize he was moving until he was already pushing the door open. Both men looked up, startled. Richard's face, flushed from alcohol, drained of all color when he saw who stood in the doorway. How long have you been standing there? Richard whispered. Long enough. Mark's voice sounded foreign to his own ears, calm despite the storm raging inside him. Long enough to hear you killed my wife. The next few hours passed in a blur of rage, confession, and devastating clarity. Richard, sobered by Mark's appearance, laid out the whole truth, how his development company had illegally disposed of industrial chemicals to cut costs on the Westfield Heights project, how he'd buried environmental reports warning of groundwater contamination, how he'd known for years that the cancer cluster in the neighborhood was his responsibility. Mark listened in stunned silence as Richard explained the elaborate web of support he'd constructed around the Stevens family out of guilt, the special insurance provisions, Emma's scholarship, even the career advancement that Mark had believed was earned through his own merit. I wanted to make it right, Richard said, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. I know nothing could bring Diane back, but I tried to make sure you and Emma would be okay. You played God with our lives, Mark said, his voice hollow. First by taking Diane, then by deciding how to compensate us without our knowledge or consent. I was a coward, Richard admitted. I couldn't face what I'd done. As the night wore on, Mark's initial rage gave way to a more complex emotion. He thought about Emma, peacefully staying with her grandparents, unaware that her world was about to change again. He thought about Diane, who had faced her illness with such grace and courage, never knowing its true cause. And he thought about Sophia, waiting for him at the restaurant, probably checking her watch and wondering why he hadn't arrived or called. With trembling hands, he finally texted Sophia. Emergency came up. Need to reschedule. I'm sorry. It felt inadequate, but how could he possibly explain what was happening? What happens now? Garrett asked, breaking a long silence. Mark looked at the man who had been his mentor.